Hey guys, it's Nicole from the QA and compliance team. Welcome to another edition of the Right Way Wednesday. We get a lot of questions about what diagnosis to use from every discipline. And anytime someone emails us or calls us and asks us a question about diagnosis choice, the very first question we ask them usually is, what's your LCD? Who's your MAC? A lot of times our clinicians don't know the answer to that question. And I will freely admit there was a very long time as a practicing clinician that I probably couldn't have answered that question very well either. And, when I think back to my undergraduate and my graduate education, I can't remember a single professor really talking about a MAC or an LCD. I can't remember any of my clinical supervisors talking about it. So clearly if they had, it certainly wasn't in a way that stuck and showed how important those two entities are, those two things are. And it wasn't really until long after I began practicing that I really went to my LCD and figured out what was in there. And it was eye-opening, to say the least. I mean, not just did it tell me or show me some of the things that I had been billing for and the codes that I had been using were maybe not in line with LCD guidelines exactly, but it also really highlighted some codes that I had been told as a speech pathologist not to use and to stay away from because they were triggers for denials. And when I went and looked at the LCD, I realized, well, yeah, I could actually use these codes. I just needed to make sure I used them right. And so I think it's really important that we talk about that today. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of talk about what a MAC is. All right, so if you don't know what a MAC is, that is your Medicare Administrative Contractor. Okay, these are like the gatekeepers of the Medicare funds, and they vary by state or by region. And we have a great tool. It's called the MAC information by state. And you can go to that tool in our documentation training tools in the company documents. Your rehab directors and program managers have access to that as well as your RVPs. And you can look and see where you fall in that map, and you can see who your Medicare administrative contractor is. I will say there's a little caveat to that. There are some companies that even say, so they're in South Carolina, they may not fall, say, under Palmetto, they may fall under a different MAC because of their corporate affiliations. So once you figure out where you lie on that map, go and just double check that with your business office manager to make sure that that is actually your MAC. And then what you want to do is go to that MAC's LCD. And so the LCD is your local coverage determination. So most MACs have one. Not all of them, but I'll get to that in a minute. Most MACs have one for PT/OT speech for each discipline. Sometimes speech is broken up into two. Sometimes you'll see one for speech and language therapy. Sometimes you'll see one for dysphagia. Sometimes they'll be together. Sometimes they'll have one for speech and language, but not dysphagia. Sometimes PT and OT will be in the same LCD. Sometimes they'll be separate. So depending on your MAC, that's how you'll see it line up when you go to that website. You can do a Google search for them, or your facility desktops should have links to each MAC on the desktop within Internet Explorer as well. So check there too. I think most of them do. These local coverage determinations are developed by discipline, and they really outline what is billable, what is not billable, limitations to certain codes, documentation requirements, all above and beyond just ICD-10 guidance. And some of the ICD-10 guidances, they'll give you a list of codes that they feel are medically necessary in order to support skilled therapy, or sometimes they'll give you a list of codes that they decided do not support medical necessity. Sometimes they give you a list of codes that tell you what codes support medical necessity for very specific CPT codes, or sometimes there's no list at all. You just have to go by the CPT code guidance that they give you and other Medicare publications, because you might be asking yourself, I said most of them have them. Some of them don't have an LCD either. So what do you do in that case, right? You can't just do what you want. You still have to meet guidelines. And those MACs, even those without LCDs or the ones even that do, will tell you that this is not the one-stop shop. This is your guidance. You are still responsible for understanding all Medicare guidelines, okay, above and beyond what your LCD says. You're responsible for understanding the national coverage determinations as well, and we'll get to that in just a second. But it is your responsibility to understand those guidelines surrounding your practice. And so if your MAC doesn't have an LCD, compliance with those guidelines is still very important. So what do, right? So you go to your professional organizations, because they often will have, or they all have, guidance surrounding CPT codes, guidance surrounding documentation, even ICD-10 diagnostic choice. They provide guidance with that and lots of resources. Review of another MAC that might have more information or just any information is sometimes a great place to start. Again, it's no guarantee because there are some small differences. Most of the time MACs have very similar guidelines, if not exactly the same. So that is a great place to go to another MAC if you need some help. And they'll tell you to refer to the NCD. So I mentioned that just a minute ago. That is your national coverage determination. So national coverage determinations have determinations for specific services like e-stim for wounds or something like that. Not all CPT codes have an NCD, and not all NCDs are really detailed in descriptions. So it really is incumbent upon the individual clinician to go to basically everything and understand what you're billing for and how you're documenting and those requirements surrounding those things. So if your MAC does have an LCD, go and review it today. If you're a rehab manager, an RVP or an SVP, I would strongly recommend reviewing the LCDs for all the disciplines so that you understand their billing guidelines in addition to your own disciplines. Remember though, again, each LCD is a little bit different. So while basic guidelines are the same, some may provide more guidance, some may provide less, and there are just some differences as far as that's concerned. Again, it's up to you to understand these differences and to understand the guidelines. And so this means knowing them as they're laid out in the Medicare Benefit Policy Manual and other Medicare and other payer publications. So you really have to do some research sometimes. And don't forget that Medicare replacement policies have their own set of guidelines sometimes, and sometimes they have their own, not LCDs, but they have what's called coverage guidelines. So you want to check those out as well. So I'll leave you with this. So yeah, we do know it can be very overwhelming when we start talking about these kinds of things. Where do you go first? How do you possibly have time to review all of these things and still get your job done? I mean, we hear you, we get it, we've all been there. But that's partly why we are here as well. So, start by reading through your LCD. That's a great place to start. If you see anything that you're just not sure about, isn't clear, you have questions about, reach out to us. If you need some additional guidance or need to know, where do I look to find this guideline, we will absolutely help you. The QA and compliance team it can be a great resource for you guys. So use us because it's really important to understand the guidelines surrounding your practice. We cannot stress that enough. And those guidelines and those tools are what we use when we develop our documentation training tools. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. A little bit longer than I normally go, but I did feel like it was a really important topic to kind of go through. I just wanted to end with, if you have any questions, you can ask them in the comment box below. You can email me directly, or you can email the team at documentation@healthpro-heritage.com or denials@healthpro-heritage.com. Thanks for watching and happy documenting.